Thanks to a fantastic rework that made her more focused on her self-agency and ability to carry the late game in terms of damage, Sivir has now become one of the most prominent AD carries in both solo queue and professional play. The goal of this video is to help you understand and take advantage of this new build, new rework, note the new changes in Sivir's identity, and get a refresher on every aspect of her kit so you can master this new version of Sivir. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on general concepts of Sivir's purpose as a champion and what success looks like in games you are doing well on her. We'll then discuss different components of her kit and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. This includes going over different matchups, rune optimizations, ability maxing, your build, and how to play out each phase of the game. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, would really appreciate a like on it if it helped you out. Before we dive into the details, let's talk high level about Sivir's adjustment to her champion identity. She's historically been more of a supportive, lower DPS AD carry that really enables her team around her ultimate on the hunt. That aspect of her kit has been toned down slightly, and her kit's instead very much focused on herself. Let's start with runes, which haven't changed too much from her previous identity. Sivir loves extended fights and plays around the insane value she gets from being able to use her AoE to DPS everybody down. Because of this, her favorite keystone at the moment is lethal tempo, and she still enjoys taking advantage of most of the precision tree to complement this. Presence of mind is a very common take on her because of her ability to proc it randomly for free with Ricochet. Legend Bloodline solves her sustain problems, and you can go cut down to shred tankier targets or coup de grace if what you simply need is more damage. For her secondary tree, Sivir's got a few more options depending on her needs. The most common tree is Inspiration to access free ass boots, and Biscuits to stabilize her early game sustain needs. In matchups where the lane pacing is relatively slow and Sivir won't have much issue being able to hit her late game strides, Sorcery is also a great option to access runes like Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm. This trades a little bit of the early game she has for even more strength in the later phases of the game. In the also inevitable situations in which you're facing very heavy engage or assassin comps and you need to bring more durability to the table, you can run Resolve and run a kit like Conditioning Overgrowth to access increased tankiness. It's pretty important for AD carries to get their core set of items, so you tend to need to get creative in terms of filling out your other needs. Your stat runes are going to be fairly similar every game, taking attack speed, adaptive force, and your choice of defensive rune in the third row. Sivir's identity has changed somewhat in her builds and the flexibility of them. Before, she was able to get a little more creative with her builds and either have a standard ADC build or the lethality poke build. Her rework has taken this creativity away and has instead realigned her to be very focused around a high risk, high reward ADC that forces her to play more for her normal DPS. She has good tools that mitigate risks with things like her mobility and her spell shield providing leverage, but in terms of her build, this means that she has fewer options. This starts with her mythic item, which has now simplified to basically having her run Kraken Slayer every game. Now that she rewards being able to consistently DPS so much, Kraken has quickly become a best in slot item for her, and this spikes her damage significantly. Conceptually, other items like Gale Force might be decent for her for the sake of repositioning, but Sivir is a champion that should have enough tools to mitigate this, and you should instead rely on using these tools in order to fill out your safety needs. The rest of her build is relatively similar every game right now, with a Phantom Dancer take second, and then running into IE in third. This is a very strong and stable core that allows her to deal an incredible amount of damage and spike even at 2 items. Against teams that are absolutely just beefy and require it, you can also upfront an LDR as your second item instead, and this should be able to solve your problems. From your 4th item and beyond, you've got a few more standard AD carry options depending on what your needs you have and things to watch out for. Items like GA for overall sustainability in major team fights, QSS items for CC, Mortal Reminder for Field Cut, and so on. There are many options that allow you to thrive, so the big thing is just knowing which one you'd like to opt into. There's a couple of quick things that you can do with Sivir's abilities that are helpful to keep track of, and I'll just touch on them here so you can integrate them into your play. The most important one is that her W Ricochet is an auto reset, so you should use it to tighten your windows of vulnerability when you DPS in team fights or trade in lane. Using your normal auto, using W to auto reset, and then running away while using tools like Q will be a key method for controlling your trade windows. You can also use Q Flash to basically remove the animation from her ability and use it as a finisher in some cases. The last main thing would probably be revolving around your E and ultimate. You should treat them as leverage tools that allow you to get away with certain abilities or engage attempts by the enemy, and you should hold them until necessary. For example, you can start team fights slow and be relatively low committal by DPSing normally, and then upping the pace when you feel threat by popping on the hunt afterwards. Quickly touching on matchups. Thanks to her rework, Sivir's matchup spread has gotten fairly good, and she has not had much trouble being able to play around her different matchups. As long as you generally know what you're dealing with and adjust your game plan according to the matchup, Sivir can usually find a way to scale. Her main weaknesses are into matchups that can outpace her DPS in later stages and also threaten her directly. Champions like Kog'Maw, Twitch, or Vayne traditionally give her some problems because they all meet this criteria. In the early game, she'll face a lot of threat from champions such as Draven as well, that are basically the early game version of this. Most other AD carries tend to not give her too many problems however, as Sivir can dilute most matchups with her spell shield. As long as you're timing around that and plays slow in most matchups, you'll be able to hit your spikes. In mid to late game team fights, I would now consider Sivir a front to back AD carry that has to be very gentle with her positioning, as she is defined by her 500 attack range. The average range for an AD carry is 550, so she tends to really have to get in there and take risks if she wants to access her maximum DPS. With this in mind, she now has some of the highest rewards out of any AD carry in the game, with high crit chance scalings and incredible mobility that allows her to clean up fights extremely easily. Sivir players should keep this in mind when playing her, especially in fights, and players are rewarded for strong fundamentals of tracking the appropriate cooldowns and respecting positioning. Focus on hitting only your priority targets and only commit your positioning once you know that the enemy is out of cooldowns. You almost always want to prioritize your safety over everything else, and you should only be hitting targets that you can reach safely. You aren't Kai'Sa or Samira, and you don't have that many tools to maneuver around as swiftly as other AD carries. Sivir is a relatively boring and simple AD carry that rewards good fundamentals, so it's a great champion to learn. Most of the time, your passive will be the key factor that allows you to dominate these fights in the later stages, so just allow the fight to come to you. Overall, her rework has increased Sivir's quality of life and overall feel into a champion that truly rewards patience and execution. As a relatively blindable AD carry with high impact in many situations, she's definitely a champion I'd recommend to add to almost any arsenal. As always, hope this guide was insightful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.